Just like there are screw-ups when it comes to sequels of games, there can also be different levels of quality within the same game. Persona 5 doesn't screw up at any point, but the difference in quality and themes between certain parts is easily visible, sometimes making the game feel like a different experience. Although for most people it is the end that stands out, as it features probably the greatest Persona villain, Maruki, to me it is the beginning of the game. Its first 15 to 20 hours, or to be more precise, its first 2 palaces. Today I'll try to make a case for why this part of Persona 5 is its best part, and in my opinion, the best part of any Persona game. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we look at the chronological start of the story, we must first look at the intro of the game and the first unique thing about Persona 5 that everyone notices. The fact that we don't actually start at the start of the story. All the way until the end of Saya's palace, we're actually looking at the retelling of the story by Joker, who's being interrogated by her. Although it becomes exhausting to go back and forth every time you start a new confidant or finish a palace, the fact that the story is structured this way is just so cool and isn't talked about enough. But with that out of the way, let's analyze the chronological beginning of this story. Story, much like the villains I'll talk about in a bit, was bolder and darker. It took itself more seriously than in the rest of the game. It was more personal to the thieves, as the things that were happening at their school. It felt compact, it felt personal and important to the characters. This is a part of why I like the beginning of Persona 5, as we see later how things get way out of proportion to the point where the thieves fight the god of control. And at that point the game just becomes pure fiction, with no real connection to the player. And honestly, I never felt like this was Persona's strong suit. The story takes a while to get going, but at the same time it's not like it's slow or boring. The villains are great, the plot is great at explaining why a bunch of kids would try to risk their lives to defeat Shadow Kamoshida, even if it's not guaranteed to make him regret his decision. They were pushed into this position, as Ryuji and Joker were threatened to be expelled, and Ann, well, she knew that Kamoshida was only going to be worse towards her, after what he's done to Suzui. Because of how personal the story is, we get to see the immediate consequences of the villain's actions, of both Kamoshida and Madarame. We see what happens to Suzui, which is one of the most shocking moments in the history of Persona. We see what happens to the volleyball team and their injuries, and we see one of Madarame's students and hear his story of how his work was stolen from him by a man he trusted. A common theme in the first act of the game is not necessarily fighting against bad or unjust adults, which is more strongly expressed later in the game, and has become a meme at this point. It's figures of authority and guidance abusing trust young adults put in them for their own benefit. And I don't know about you, but this theme is far more interesting than the adults bad one we see for the rest of the game. Kamoshida is a teacher, a pillar of light who is supposed to lead his students and help them become better adults in the future. Madarame is Yusuke's guardian and caretaker, who is supposed to have an even more important role in his life than a teacher would. Yet he abuses that status and Yusuke's trusting nature to steal his art and brand it as his own. Both of them are in a position which should aid young adults, and yet they do all manner of horrible things to them, for their own benefit or pleasure. This is why the first act, along with the villains, carries more weight, because it's a complete distortion of roles of authority figures, and not just adults can be irresponsible and bad too. This theme disappears from the game until Okumura, who is Haru's dad. But I feel like the weight there isn't on the fact that he's an authority figure, or her dad. It's on the fact how he views people as disposable tools and how he values them only based on how much value they bring to him. And I don't even need to say anything about Kaneshiro or Shido. One is a mafia boss and the other is a power-hungry politician. They don't exactly fit into this category. Saya is also a weird case, since she's technically the caretaker of Makoto, but I would put her in the same boat as Okumura, since the weight of her arc is less on bettering their relationship and more about how she stopped caring about justice and only chased after promotions. I mean, even Joker's parents kinda fit into this category, since Sojiro says they decided to get rid of you since you were such a pain in the ass. Not exactly great parents. Another great theme of the game is that all of the Phantom Thieves are social outcasts, and especially in the Kamoshida arc, that theme really comes into play. By the end of the game, the theme becomes something else, and never again is it shown so directly as in the first arc. Ryuji, Ann, and Joker are outcasts, and we directly witness this in the school. all of the gossip and bad rumors are directed at them. It really feels like a hostile environment for all of them. Even in the library, people talk about how dangerous of a person they think Joker is, despite him literally being in the library and studying like a good student. I mean, I've never studied in the school library. It just shows how much of a grip Kamoshida has over the entire school. He's the one that leaked Joker's criminal record and got everyone gossiping. And all of those students would rather believe him than their own eyes at the sight of Joker studying quietly. But these details, which gradually disappear as the story progresses, are only a small part of what makes the first 15 hours of Persona 5 so great. So let us mention another thing, which is closely tied to the story and is also very important to the quality of this part of the game: the villains. In a world where Maruki doesn't exist, Kamoshida and Madarame are by far the best villains of Persona 5. They are the only villains who don't feel one-dimensional or bland, although you could say the same for Cyanide. But Kaneshiro, Okumura and Shido are so bland that it's comical. All they care for is money and power, or both. Kaneshiro is literally a caricature of the money-grubbing villain, Okumura of the power-hungry capitalist, and Shido of a fanatic politician, who in the end only strokes his own ego. Kamoshida and Madarame are different from the rest, and some of it can be attributed to their already mentioned roles in the themes of the game. And another part of it is, again, the already mentioned direct connection they have to the main cast. They are so detestable, and their actions are so influential on the characters that they're the only two villains you actually feel might be offed by one of the thieves. Even if it wasn't so direct in the case of Yusuke, there is still real tension when he learns about how his mother died. Like I said, they're not as good as Maruki, but they don't need to be. They manage to embody the themes of Persona 5's early game, and that's enough. That alone makes them special. And in synthesis with every other part Persona 5's first act does well, what you end up getting is the best part of all of Persona. My biggest problem with Persona 5 was always how it deals with its main cast, especially Ryuji and Ann. The game takes both of them more seriously in the beginning, and as the story progresses, both of their relevance and their personality shifts. In the context of the main story, that is. I'll be referring to this as characters being forgotten, which is a pretty strong word in this case because they're not really forgotten. It's just that they're not involved in the process of decision making or, well, contributing anything outside of combat to the Phantom Thieves. And that is kind of lame. This game pretty much reserved this role for Futaba and Makoto once they appear. And I just feel that, for example, in Persona 4, every member had clear strengths and weaknesses, but everybody contributed something to the investigation. So, first to get the obvious out of the way. Each palace, except Shido's and Sae's, acts as an introduction to a new Phantom Thieves member, with an exception of the first palace introducing Morgana, Ryuji and Ann all at the same time. Each member gets their own time to shine and develop during their respective palaces, but only two of them stay engaged in the main story after their palace is over. Those two are Futaba and Makoto. These two essentially work as Joker's right hand and do most of the job for the Phantom Thieves after they're introduced, while everyone else just falls into the background. This, although not ideal, would be fine if those characters got a fitting confidant to flush them out more, but many of them didn't. That's not to say that their confidants are bad, it's just that they're supposed to be better than how they are. We're talking about the main cast after all. Even worse, a main cast that doesn't get enough attention in the main story. Ryuji is probably the biggest victim of the story, as by its end he's turned into the butt of every joke, and a tool to push the forced plot point of Morgana leaving the thieves. Every story needs a comic relief character, and we have them in every Persona game. Kanji from Persona 4 is in a very similar situation to Ryuji, as we can often see how the story uses him to get a laugh out of the player. But then on the other hand, he does have his moments when he shines brighter than the rest of the team. Ryuji doesn't get to shine until the very end, if we exclude the first act. And his great moment is followed by the game, again, getting a laugh out of him. He's such an interesting character, with a pretty fleshed out confidant, but I still wish he had more spotlight in the main story. I mean, he's your bro in this game. He had the potential to be best bro, but he gets pushed aside, just like the next few characters I'll be talking about. It's Ann who takes most of the spotlight during the first arc of the game, and there is nothing wrong with that, because she was recently hurt by Kamoshida and harbors more resentment and anger towards him than Ryuji because of it. But she also has the same problem that Ryuji has. that she disappears from the main story after the second palace. I guess just because she and Ryuji aren't the smartest characters, like the two previously mentioned, that they have no way to contribute to the thieves at all. And although Anne has more spotlight in the first palace than Ryuji, to me her confidant is far more boring than his. Now that I think about it, maybe the first palace leaves such an impact because all three of you are kind of in the same boat. All of the gossip around the school is about you. Ryuji and Joker are facing expulsion and Anne, well, need I say more. It felt like camaraderie. It felt like all of you are in the trenches together, while every other palace focuses mostly on the new Phantom Thief. But we must not forget Yusuke. Although he's never really important to the decision making in the Thieves, he's at least taken seriously in his arc. Later he becomes something like Ryuji, used for a few laughs. He's one of the characters that really lacked the screen time in the main story. However, he did get a really good confidence, so I can't complain too much here. And he does copy skill cards for you, so he is somewhat relevant outside of combat. But I still feel like the game does him dirty sometimes, making him seem weirder than he is, just to get a few laughs out of him. When Ryuji's already taken a hit to be a comic relief, do we really need two of them? Maybe it's a little wrong not mentioning Haru, but yeah. She's also forgotten soon after her arc is over. I made this segment purely to admire Kamoshida's palace, which honestly, why didn't they keep some of the things they put in this one throughout the entire game? A giant, easily missable area which acts like a shortcut between the main hall and the very top of the dungeon. Even talking overall, this connectivity feels like it's from a Souls game. And this kinda leads me to believe that safe rooms weren't yet added at this point in the game, but maybe I'm wrong on this. But still. This palace has so many distinct little areas, and it undeniably has the best palace soundtrack in the game. Not to mention that at this point, the game is still pretty hard, especially in some areas. At the end, I just want to make clear that, despite some shortcomings of P5 that I mentioned throughout the video, the game is still a great game overall. Even if the rest isn't as great as the first arc, that doesn't change the fact that it is still a very good game and a great experience. Although it's true that I would have been happier if the game retained some of the qualities of the first arc, I can still appreciate the game for what it is. But I hope you enjoyed. I hope I sold you on the idea that the beginning of P5 is its best part. And even if not, at least you heard a fresh perspective. So, until next time.